We, in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks, we talked about taxonomy, how we classify things, what the groups are. And then we started working our way through each of the kingdoms. We real quickly talked about archaea and bacteria. We talked about fungi, spent a little bit more time on protists, spent more time on plants. And so that leaves us with just one kingdom that we haven't talked about yet, and that's the animal kingdom. And so that's the next section of what we're going to do. This is the last section of our taxonomy unit. So today we'll be talking about just a couple general characteristics of animals. Then we'll start to talk about some of the groups, and we'll continue on after we finish up with our benchmark. So you guys already told me in our question today the overall characteristics of animals. Okay? So as you said, animals are multicellular. They're made of many cells. Those cells have a nucleus, and they have other organelles, complex organelles. And animals are heterotrophic. They need to consume other organisms. That's how they get energy. So we're in the domain Eukarya, kingdom Animalia. Within that kingdom, we have kind of one big split in animals that we often talk about. And that's animals that have a backbone and animals that do not. So backbones, really. What is the name of these bones that? Yeah, there's another term. Okay, so you're coming up with these terms. Vertebrate. These are the vertebrae, your backbones. There's a bunch of bones stacked atop each other. And the animals that have that spinal cord, that spinal column, and the vertebrae, and have an internal skeleton, those are called vertebrates. And then there are many animals that do not have that. They have no bones. They have no backbone. Those are the animals that we call the invertebrates. We're going to start by talking about the invertebrates. Which group would this belong in? Jenna? That's a vertebrate. Frogs are vertebrates, yes. How about, raise your hand, earthworm? Yeah? Invertebrate. No bones in an earthworm. How about a lobster? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Yeah? Invertebrate. If you ever ate like a whole lobster, there's no bones in there. It has a skeleton, but it's on the outside. It's called an exoskeleton. And then a cute little polar bear. All right. So let's do a little bit more on your slide. Why don't you just write an I or a V beneath each one. Do it on your own first, and then we'll go over that. So what do you think? I invertebrate, V vertebrate. There's a couple that are commonly confused or mixed up. So, hello? Which Grace? A or M? Grace M. Your lunch is in the All right, so Ava, what'd you say about the snake?
I didn't know this one.
Yeah, this is one that a lot of people get confused on. Claudia?
It's invertebrate.
It's actually a vertebrate. A lot of people will say invertebrate, but really a snake, its whole body has this long, very flexible set of vertebrae go down the side. That's a vertebrate. A crab. Sophia, what did you say for the crab?
Invertebrate.
Yeah, it's like the lobster. It's an invertebrate. Has an exoskeleton, but not a skeleton inside. How about this starfish? Kiara, what did you say for the starfish? Invertebrate. Yep. There's no bones inside of that. Zach, how about the ant?
It's probably invertebrate.
Correct. No bones inside of an ant. This one sometimes trips people up. Eva, what'd you say for the mouse? Yeah, it is a vertebrate, but a lot of times people will say invertebrate. Like I've heard people say, oh, mice don't have bones. They have bones inside of them. They can, people say it, I think, because they can fit in a very, very small space, and they're not as big as they actually look because they're fur, but they have bones and they have backbone. All those other parts. How about a salamander? Savannah?
Vertebrate.
Yeah, that's a vertebrate. Bailey, how about the slug? Yep, invertebrate. The red panda? Brandon?
Vertebrate.
Vertebrate. The fly, Mia. What's that?
Vertebrate.
No, invertebrate. All right. So we're going to talk about invertebrates today in the next class. And when we're talking about the invertebrates, one of the characteristics that we use to sort of place them in different phyla is something called their symmetry. So I think probably maybe in art class, maybe in math class, you've heard of symmetry. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's 3 words we use when we're discussing the symmetry that an organism has. And symmetry is sort of how it's set up, how the parts of the animal or the organism are arranged. And some organisms, they have no overall plan to their body. We say that they have asymmetry. There's really no pattern. If we were to draw a random shape, this has no symmetry. It's not, I couldn't draw a line and split it into equal halves or equal quarters or anything like that. It's just no real pattern to its organization. Then there is bilateral symmetry. What does the prefix bi mean? 2. Bi means 2. Iso. So lateral means side, so this is 2 sides. An organism has bilateral symmetry if it's sort of a mirror image on each half. You can draw a line and split it into 2 equal halves. That's bilateral symmetry. An example of an organism with bilateral symmetry. If you draw a line down the middle of Homer, you have basically 2 equal sides. Now it doesn't have to be perfect. It's the overall layout of the organism. Okay? If one ear is longer than the other, that doesn't affect symmetry. Nothing's going to be completely identical side to side, but the overall body plan. And then there's radial symmetry. Anyone want to tell me, what do you think radial symmetry is, Jenna?
It's equal on 4 sides.
Yeah, it could be 4 or even 8. It's really a circular pattern, circular symmetry. For example, a flower has radial symmetry. It's organized in a circular pattern. And you could draw several lines through that flower, splitting it into equal parts. So let's look at some examples and see if we can identify the types of symmetry. Oh, here's already drawn out for you. This beetle. What type of symmetry does it have? Michael? What's that? Bilateral symmetry, yes. Ethan, how about this sea anemone? Look back if you need it. Radial. If you look at it from the top, it's organized in a circular pattern. You could draw several lines splitting in equal parts. And how about this sponge? Trista? Asymmetry. It doesn't have any pattern to it. All right. What do you think about these things? How about this cat? What type of symmetry, Brandon? Bilateral, yes. Draw a line down the middle. You have whiskers on each side, an eye on each side, an ear on each side. That's bilateral symmetry. Number 2 often trips people up a little bit. The spider. What do you think, Mia? Yeah, sometimes people say, though, radial. It's not radial. Okay? It's bilateral symmetry. We could split it in half down the middle like that. If I drew a line this way, I wouldn't have equal parts because I have, the head up here and the mouth, down here the abdomen, so that wouldn't be equal. So this is bilateral symmetry. Now this is not an animal. It's a protist. But what protist was this? Claudia? What protist is this? Nigella? Amoeba. What type of symmetry does it have? Claudia? Asymmetry. So I shouldn't say what type of symmetry. It has asymmetry. Now this is, what is this thing? Not a ball. Close. Not an anemone, but you're on the right track. A sea urchin. It has radial symmetry. Those spikes that come off of it are arranged in a circular pattern. Okay? And so that's an example of radial symmetry. This is invertebrate we're going to look at next week. This type of flat one is called a planaria. What type of symmetry does this planaria have? David, what do you think?
Bilateral.
Yeah, bilateral. Just draw a line down equal sides. You know what this is?
Horseshoe crab.
Horseshoe crab. Grace, what kind of symmetry do you think it has? Think about it. Yeah, bilateral. You draw a line down the middle and it's equal halves. Do you know what this is? Sand dollar. What type of symmetry does a sand dollar have? Yeah? Yeah, that's radial symmetry. It's like spokes coming out. We could draw a line in several ways, splitting it into equal sides. And the starfish? John? It's not, it's actually radial. Yeah, if like one leg is bent, that's okay. It's still organized generally like spokes from a wheel in a circular pattern. So that's a radial symmetry. All right, for a moment, picture in your head an animal, any animal you want. So my guess is that almost all of you, when I ask you to think of an animal, you're thinking of a vertebrate, right? Probably a mammal, most likely. Some people maybe not. But actually, about 95% of the animal species that have been identified are actually invertebrates. Even though we might tend to think of vertebrates when we think of animals, most are actually invertebrates. They're about 95% of all species.
How is that possible?
It's just not what we immediately might think of, but it's just there's many, many types. Do you know which group is the biggest out of the invertebrates? Yes, insects. There's a huge variety of different types of insects and arthropods. And animals go from things that are very simple, like a sponge, to things that are much more complex, like a crab or an octopus. There's a big variety of animals. And what we're going to do is talk about each phylum a little bit and just sort of list some examples, talk about the characteristics, so that we understand some of these invertebrates a little bit better. So one phylum, the first, and these are the simplest animals, the simplest invertebrates. They're sponges. The actual name of the phylum is called Porifera. Porifera. And the sponges, things like this. This is, have you seen these kind of things before?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you're buying like the fancy bath store, or like using the shower or whatever.
They're alive.
Yeah, these are not alive now.
I know they're like.
So they were alive though. What this really is, this was once an animal that was alive in the ocean. It sort of attaches to the bottom of the ocean, and it grows there. It takes in water. You know, when you put it in the water, it absorbs a lot of water. There's lots of these tiny little holes. That's where the name pore. A pore is like a hole. That's why it's called porifera. This is a little squishy. If you got it wet, it'd be really squishy. I'll pass it around. But this was this is the leftover skeleton of a once living animal. Okay, all the living parts of this are dead, but this remains. And
Is that safe to use?
yeah, it's fine.
Claudia?
Claudia? Oh yeah. So Claudia said her uncle was a diver. You could, if you dive into the ocean, they're generally in shallower water, oftentimes, or in deep water as well. You could dive. They come in a huge variety of colors, shapes, sizes. There's a wide variety of these sponges, but they're again very simple. Jenna?
Do these grow from like down to up?
Yeah.
Because the way that they're shaped.
Yeah, they like attach to the surface and then grow upward. And sponges, like a bunch of other vertebrates, are what we call filter feeders. Does anyone know what that word might mean, a filter feeder? Jordan?
They eat all algae.
Yeah. They basically suck water in through those holes, and as the water is moving through them, they filter out little bits of plants and animals and protists and tiny little things out of the water, and that's what they use as their food. So that's what a filter feeder is. They obviously have asymmetry. There's no real pattern there to those. They come in lots of colors. They grow in lots of colors. Often they have one larger hole in the middle, and they suck water in through the sides, filter out the food, and squeeze the rest of the water out through the top. There's all sorts of shapes and sizes, and some look like pipes, and some are blue, some are red, some are yellow. There's just a very, very wide variety. Zach?
So those ones were like, fish and stuff?
No, they're just, that's what they are. They look like this, and then when they die, the living parts sort of decompose, and you're left with this exoskeleton, and that's what we gather up. Now, was this once a living animal?
Yes.
No. This is a synthetic sponge, the kind you use to wash your dishes. It's just foam that they put air through to make holes in it. So this was not a once living creature, but that.
Wait, that's foam?
Yeah, it's just like foam.
It's like furry.
Yes.
It's scared to touch it.
Grace?
Is it hard?
What?
When you step on it?
No, they're kind of soft and kind of squishy, especially when they're filled with water. All right, so those are the sponges, Porifera. Another sea creature you might have seen before is a group called the Cnidarians. Now, it has a C in front of it, but it's like a silent C. And the Cnidarians are a type of invertebrate. They have radial symmetry. Often they have tentacles. And on these tentacles, they have special cells that are called nematocysts. And these cells basically are what they use to hunt their prey. Those tentacles, when they wrap around their prey, they shoot a little stinger into their prey, which can immobilize it, paralyze it, and kill it. And then they can consume their prey. And so, if you've been to the ocean, you may have seen oftentimes jellyfish wash up on the beach.
Oh, yeah.
You could find them. If you ever are swimming in the ocean and you get stung by a jellyfish, yeah, it hurts. The sting, it depends on the type of, some jellyfish, their nematocysts aren't strong enough to penetrate into skin and they don't hurt you. Other types can and they can sting really bad. There are even some types of like comb jellyfish that can kill a person. And so those are rare and only in certain spots. But yeah, those jellyfish drift through the water, kind of float on that central jellyish part, and then they capture small organisms that they use as their food source. Grace?
My sister, when we were in Hilton Head, she got like one wrapped around her foot, but like, how do they sting you?
So on those tentacles that got wrapped around her leg, they had these cells and they shoot a little thing into your skin. And you know, there's old wives' tales about what you should do if a person gets stung by jellyfish. Has anyone ever heard one of them?
Yeah.
Pee on it?
Yeah.
Doesn't actually help.
Yes, it does.
Doesn't. So there are, if you're at an area on a beach where their jellyfish are common, oftentimes in like the lifeguard stations, what they'll have is a little spray bottle that has vinegar in it. And the vinegar, the acids in the vinegar can neutralize some of the sting. And what you're supposed to do if you get those nematocysts in your skin is kind of scrape them out with like a thin piece of, like a credit card or something. You can scrape them out, spray it with the vinegar solution, and that helps it to feel better. But peeing on it is not going to help. It's just
Is it your favorite sanitary though to use?
No,
You used to your own.
Well, I worked.
Yes.
You pee on the jellyfish?
No. People say you should pee on what was stung, but that's not actually true.
It does work.
All right, so here's some examples.
I did it.
This is one we're going to look at next week. This is an Cnidarian. It's called a Hydra. And a Hydra is a small Cnidarian. You can see the tentacles at the top. It usually like attaches to some surface on the bottom. Its mouth is at the top and between all the tentacles, and it grabs tiny little organisms, puts that into its body, which can expand quite a bit, and that's where it digests them. The other thing on this picture, this Hydra, a new Hydra is growing out of the side of this adult Hydra. It's reproducing asexually through a method called budding. Some jellyfish are bioluminescent, meaning they can create their own light. They're like a firefly, especially some that live deep in the ocean where light doesn't penetrate. Some of them make their own light through this chemical process. They're pretty neat. A sea anemone is also an example of an Cnidarian. They have those cells, but the clownfish is resistant to those stinging cells and it's not affected by them. That's why Nemo can go into the anemone and is not harmed by it. It helps to protect the clownfish, and the clownfish at the same time gives the anemone some food by bits and pieces of things that it eats, so they have this symbiotic relationship. There's another picture of a sea anemone. Tristan. Here you see some larger jellyfish. We usually go to South Carolina in the spring, like Surfside Beach area near Myrtle Beach, and a lot of times you see these bullseye jellyfish wash up on the beach, and they're sort of got a brown spot in the middle. They just sort of wash up and die on the shore sometimes. There's another example. All right, another phylum of invertebrates is the echinoderms. The name means spiny skin. Derm means skin. That's like a dermatologist is a doctor that helps people with skin problems. Echinoderm means spiny skin. These are organisms, they're also filter feeders usually, and they have radial symmetry. They include things like this. What is it?
Sand dollar.
Yeah, sand dollar. Sand dollars are actually animals. When they're alive, they often are colorful. When they die, they bleach out, and that's what, if you see them at like a shell store, you see them. And they actually move around. They're like a little, that Roomba robot vacuum?
Yeah.
They kind of move around like that, sucking little bits of organic matter out of the sand. That's what they use for their food source. Okay. It also includes sea urchins that often have these large spikes, starfish. Okay. Those are all examples of echinoderms. Starfish are interesting. They have an ability to regenerate. If you cut the starfish in half, each half would grow into a new starfish. If you cut off one arm of that starfish, it would grow back. They can regenerate lost parts quite well. Jordan?
How long does it usually take for?
Oh, it takes a long time. Weeks, I would say. Months.
Mr. Ross, if you cut the whole fish, will it die?
Well, if you cut off just a little section here, that part wouldn't become another jellyfish. It has to have some of this central portion to actually grow into the new animal. Grace?
Are starfish squishy?
No, they're hard. They have like a spiny skeleton. They have feet on the bottom of them they use to like walk around.
They can walk.
Yeah. They move
around.
around. This is a picture. This shows, sand dollars move pretty slowly, but this is just,
Are alive?
yeah, they're alive. Here you could see one moving. It's a time lapse, but you could see the circular patterns that it makes.
What do you think they are? Yes. What?